I'm sure we'll have a few more folks to join us, but let's start with a prayer and get going. So let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us back here again, or some of us for the first time, to explore the basics of how we organize. During this time, may your Spirit be among us and give us courage and an open mind and a desire to try some of this out for your greater glory, for the cause of justice. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. We have a few new folks, so maybe we could just go around. Please say our name in church. My name's Colin. I'm at St. Paul's Cathedral.
I'm Dinora, and I come from San Diego Organizing Project.
Joseph from the Cathedral.
Sandy Lawrence in St. Paul's Cathedral. Anita, St. Paul's.
Norma from St. John's, here, June Lester.
David Kessler and St. Philip. St. Philip.
Oh, good luck.
I'm Rob from St. Philip's.
I'm Rosy.
We're just in introduction. This is perfect.
I'm Carlos from St. Louis.
We just got one more person to say your name in church.
Where's St. Philip's?
Milgram.
Oh.
Say your name in church.
I'm Phyllis Miller. Some of you are not old enough to remember. I'm Gary Arps from St. Paul's.
I was going to offer an even briefer, just theological reflection, but before that, did anyone have any questions, comments, your own reflections, and kind of those who were here last week about what you heard? No problem if you don't, but just sometimes it's nice to give that space if there's anything burning on
Great
your mind.
class. Great class. I learned a lot.
You know, it was awesome. We were blessed to have you.
What did you learn?
Good question.
It's something I've always known, but it's kind of like to reflect upon it again, you know, why we do what we do and what we're called to do. And our role is not just to sit in church and pray and feel good. And a public face.
Hopefully it's all right if we videotape it again. There's some people who can't make it, so they'll watch the video afterward. Anyone else?
Well, if anybody took on some notes last week, I'd like to read them.
I don't have them with me, but I can next time.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Basically, I want to ask something. Is consensus organizing the same as we took in the Latino community?
Good question. So let's see, if anyone else gone to that training, it was just the two of you all, Roger Carlos too, right? Were you there? You did, who's there? We did, some folks here have spent the last year or so kind of part of this Latino leadership development project, and as part of it we did a couple of trainings with the Consensus Organizing Center at San Diego State. So yeah, I mean they're coming from the same basic place in terms of approach. The San Diego Organizing Project is more explicitly faith-based. And yeah, other than that, I mean, yeah, it's the same idea. But this, I don't think you'll find this repetitive. I think we're going to get more into some of the details. And actually last week was cool because we got into, I think, a more sophisticated kind of why organizing than what we did in the Consensus Organizing training. We tried to pack a lot into, we tried to pack all 3 nights that we're doing here into like 6 hours, which I guess is what we're doing now. Anyway, but we did other things at that other training. We were trying to get us all in the churches.
Yes. Okay.
But I'll look forward to hearing. Feel free to kind of say like, oh, this is the same or this is different, you know.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I like the different shapes. It was a new concept last week.
What did you saw?
I just have to remember.
Dinora is also like an artist, basically, for the you haven't seen, so she's maybe she can pick out
I
some.
took pictures.
I draw stick figures and
Oh.
triangles and squares.
You'll see. Well, what I could come up with is a brief theological reflection this week, just thinking about Pentecost coming up. You all know the story. The disciples were in a room, and all of a sudden there's this rush of wind. Tongues of flame come down and rest on the heads of each of the disciples. Of course, they're confused, scared, and somehow they start speaking languages that they've never probably even encountered before. So the Spirit pushes them out into that street, and folks can't believe that they're hearing the native languages in Jerusalem, languages that are only spoken hundreds of miles away. So it's a miracle. And Peter uses that as a chance after kind of getting past the joke that everyone's just drunk. He's like, oh no, it's not anymore. Can't be that. Uses a chance to start proclaiming the gospel, the good news. And I think there's like 3,000 people baptized that day. So we often think of Pentecost as the birth of the church. In thinking about how it relates to what we're doing tonight and over these few weeks, one way to think about it, I think, is how this Pentecost miracle fits into community organizing. Possibly has something to do with starting with that common language, because if we can't speak in ways that we understand with each other, then we can't really do anything together, which is, Pentecost is often kind of the way of thinking of rebuilding what the Tower of Babel destroyed. So the people in Genesis could do these amazing things because they all had one language, until they tried to build a tower that would make them like God. And so God said, whoa, this isn't cool. And so that's when God made all the different peoples have different languages, and they couldn't talk to each other anymore. So Pentecost is kind of this rebuilding of one people through the power of the Spirit. But you and I know that we live in a world that is much more like that post-Tower of Babel time. Obviously, we actually literally speak some different languages, but much more importantly, we're all just starting to speak more and more individual languages. Elaine, please grab a chair. It's Elaine Graybill from the Cathedral. Hi, Elaine. Sure. And so the way you start with community organizing is by sitting down with one other person and listening. To pay attention to how they use words, to what they care about, and what drives them, what moves them. And the miracle in that is that once we can start to use that same language and to speak in the same ways that can be compelling and moving to people, then some pretty amazing things get done. So I think there's a miracle in that too. And I think the prayer that we have is that the Holy Spirit can give us the courage to get out of our comfort zone enough to sit down and really listen to people who are different than us, to start there. It takes a humility that I don't think is natural too much to us, and it takes patience, but it bears much fruit. So I think that's part of what we're going to continue learning about tonight, and I think it's the Pentecostal miracle that we pray for and that we are entering into in this coming season of Pentecost. Anyway, that's what I have. What about you, Nora?
Last week I asked all of you to take a couple minutes and amongst each other and talk about why you're here. So why don't we take a couple minutes just to reflect and maybe meet with someone who you don't know or maybe you don't know as well. And for people it's their first time, then answer, why am I here? Why did you come here? And then for the rest of the folks, why did you decide to come back? So why don't we take a couple minutes just so we can get to know each other and just see what comes out of that. Do that.
It was not low last week.
You want to talk with me? You want to talk with her? You want to talk with me? I want you to sit back down. You want me to sit here? So you're from St. Louis? Yes. You're supposed to talk to somebody you don't know.
Why don't you all?
Yeah. Elaine. Sure.
When I read
And then you come. Why don't you
Oh.
come?
you, I had
Okay, the only thing
What is the only two, darling?
she doesn't speak that much English.
Oh, that'll be fine.
Oh, okay. Pentecostal.
It doesn't matter. Hi, I'm Elaine. Nice to meet you. How are you doing? Where'd you go? Where'd you go? Yeah, you go
Pardon me.
Oh, that was our original. Yes, that was the original People Church
Yes.
when we were downtown. That was in Plymouth Road.
Yes.
And I've never been in it.
Really?
I've never been in it. It's old. So, let's see, when we refurbished our organ, which is pipes and metal, 25 years old, so that means there's probably a measure. So,
I checked the average because
Yes.
I don't know how I came to do it, but I and I get the most amazing. And you're from the. Oh, yes, often. In fact, I often wonder why.
We got new one.
I don't go there every week because I don't know music. I love just.
and they had done the original one.
So they gave us.
Oh, that's wonderful. God, that's cool. So, you were here last week. So tell me why you're here. I mean, I actually am familiar with St. Martin's because I was involved from 47 so I had heard them in several other places, and I also Father Peter, Our Lady's Guadalupe, and Barrio Lowe did a their faith action, and so they organized a project, came in and worked with us because Laura, one of the staff members, goes to Guadalupe. So I'm familiar with them. Are you familiar with them? Have you worked with them before?
Not before, we worked in the which is kind of similar to what we do. And right now we are so
So you have a lot of decent congregation also, just like we do?
yes.
Do you have a separate Spanish language mass?
Yes.
We were members for 30 years. With our friends.
So the Latino congregation is
Bigger.
larger than the English speaking, which is the opposite of Judaism.
Come back together.
No, we're just getting started, we're not ready. Just a little more content. I'm just now getting ground in, I'm going for that. Well, I didn't really know the Armenian congregation, and then as a congregation, so a group of people know each other through other things. Now I mean, me, because I'm not Catholic. And so I went in and helped, and I got to know the congregation. And now they've completely taken over as they always wanted to do, but no one ever has. And, but it's worked out. So those of us, so that meant I stayed in service. It didn't matter, I love the children, and the children. I sort of cycle through, and then I go to all their.
And I always,
I'm all about the food.
Obese.
kind of work. I know you have they were in my grandchildren.
All right, folks, we're gonna get back.
Thank you.
It's so interesting, when I do events, I remind people really don't want to sit down at a dinner table where they can only talk to the person on either side. They really nobody wants to go to bed except they have to sit down and eat. That's interesting.
Chair, so. Sounds like everybody has a good conversation,
No.
especially over here.
No, we organized an event. And we signed.
You have a committee. I just sat down on the name tag. Oh, I want to finish talking.
That was the beginning.
I didn't get through. I had stuff, I was busy. I had stuff I wanted to accomplish. So I have.
So why don't we share a couple of thoughts, or what did you hear that was interesting, or what would you want to share? Well, let's do one person who came back and then someone who was here for the first time.
I didn't say anything, but I tell you,
Oh, I don't believe it.
Carlos is really impressed with the different organizing concepts and where the motivation comes, the political motivation and the spiritual motivation. And he also was talking about how he needs to be a better listener and how they're going to put some, and how, no, you're good, how to put some of these principles in play at St. Philip's. And so just talking about that.
Nice. Anybody else? I'm gonna pick on you, since you picked on me.
So I was hearing about St. Philip's also, and I had a specific thing that I wanted to talk about. I had two specific things, but because they have a larger Visa congregation than they do an Anglo congregation. So I was hearing about how, and they have some of the same issues, but they're just flipped. I know, it's interesting, isn't it? And I was just getting into, what they were trying to do to bring those congregations together. And I wanted to hear how they utilize their kitchen. I have a specific reason for that. So I'm all about communal church kitchens. So we can start. You know better. So anyway, that is, and because that building was the original St. Paul's, it was the one that was downtown. It was moved.
Interesting.
Yeah, so parts of it have to be about 125 years old, over 100 years old. So, when the cathedral they first built the Great Hall, which was like in 1948 or 49, in 1928. And they stayed downtown in the church. And then there was the crash, you remember that. So they didn't build the church building until 48, 49, 50. And at that point, that church was moved to Lemon Grove.
My understanding is that the building at St. Philip's is the oldest
Extant is the word you're looking for.
oldest existing continuously use of spiritual meeting places.
Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
You understood?
I mean, it's only
It's not in the
interesting.
same location, but it's still.
It's only interesting because we did a whole series on this several years ago for our stewardship. And so it's really nice to meet somebody because I've never seen the church.
I was only there once.
And it's been there for 50 years.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like people are already having one-to-ones here.
Cocktails would be
Right.
better.
So what about somebody who was here for the first time? What brought you here?
Just the idea of organizing and knowing what other people are doing in their churches. and how that can help maybe our church.
Great, thank you. So why don't we do a quick recap of some of what we saw last time for folks who are here for the first time, and just to review what we saw. The biggest, I think the biggest concept we talked about was building relationships. And so we did an exercise where we compared the world in terms of the real life issues that occur and then the ideal. So we did a comparison of what pressing issues are hurting families right now, and we talked everything from homelessness to hunger, poverty. So it was a real deep issues. We talked about the lack of good schools, safety, so things that are just commonly known to affect especially low-income or marginalized families. And then I had everybody close their eyes and I asked them, imagine the world or the kingdom that God created for us, and what does that look, what does that feel like, what are the qualities of that? And here we talked about love and peace and safety and equality. And then we realized that in the real world, we were focused on issues, things that were hurting people in real life issues. And in an ideal world, what we envision as the world God wants for us is filled with values. And in order for us to get from one side to the other, there has to be a construction with a foundation, and this construction of a bridge. And we believe in faith organizing that the bridge here, the main thing keeping it together is the building of relationships. And it's a relationships among people in their churches, relationships among congregations and the communities that surround them, and then also relationships with public officials or public entities that shape the real life situations that people are facing. So this is what we saw last week, and ultimately we believe that the path from the real to the ideal is through building relationships. I think this was like the ultimate takeaway. We talked about, also used the Exodus story to illustrate how we believe that there's 3 steps to really activating people, or the way that the formation of faith really is created. And the first step is a cry out to God. And the cry out to God, we believe, in organizing and by using the Exodus story to illustrate it, is that that's the moment where people realize when a slave was killed and they realized something was wrong, and they cried out to God and asked, why is this happening? Why are people suffering? Why are people being killed? And it was really the moment where people realized that there was a problem. The second was a public process of pain. So this needed 2 people, and those 2 people amongst each other said, there's something wrong. This is what I'm feeling. And there was a conversation, sharing a story that allowed for those 2 people to create a connection. And ultimately, these people realized when they talked about the killing of the slave, there's something wrong here. What do we do? There's something wrong with the world. So ultimately, there's also a critique of the world around us. So we realize it's not our fault. We realize when we were alone, there's something bigger. I need to find someone who feels the same way that I do. And together we realize that it's not us. It's not just us who are responsible for this. There's a bigger system, a bigger power that's creating this problem. And last, there was, so I don't remember exactly the term, but we had a building. Do you remember the third specific?
Release
the
of
public
social,
processing of pain?
release of social
Imagination.
imagination.
Oh,
Social imagination.
yeah, the
Release.
release, yeah.
Yes. Social imagination. And that took these 2 people and brought in more people. And not only did they create a critique of the world, but then they started creating their own world. Within their values and within the critique that they made, they started using their imagination to create solutions for those problems. So we use this really to illustrate the process that people's faith really goes through when they're exposed and when they actually accept organizing into the congregations.
I was going to say, isn't this very same process for an individual coming to some kind of personal faith
Of course.
commitment to this?
Yes,
So you're suggesting that the personal faith growth and realization of the necessity for God in our lives can also be the impetus for a creative community too.
yes, exactly.
So this crying out is a big step.
Exactly, yes, and this is really the foundation of a congregation accepting organizing. One of the biggest principles we believe in is that the first revolution is internal. Once a person can cry out to God and the person accepts the revolution within themselves, then they allow themselves to go and create relationships with other people and share that narrative, and then create, like Colin was saying, create a universal narrative amongst their congregation. That is then in the next two steps, taking out into each other, and then the third step is into public life.
A Christmas carol comes to mind, the one that says, "Do you see what I see? Do you see what I see?" And isn't that?
Yes.
So you ask the other person to look through a similar set of, well, eyes.
We always see the same thing down here.
No, we don't.
That's so true.
When I had cocktail time tonight, I was so sorry. Actually, I didn't. I'm just teasing her.
And ultimately, without the first and the second step, we cannot achieve the third. And I will give a personal example. When I started, I was eager and excited, and really, as probably a young, naive person, thought, I can fix it. I can fix Chula Vista and Sweetwater School District, and I can fix National City. I can fix all of South Bay on my own. I just need a couple leaders who believe in me, and we're going to get this done. So I was jumping into number 3. I put people together in a room, and I asked them, what should we change, and let's go change it. But people had not accepted an internal revolution, and neither had I. And I realize now, in retrospect, without the 2 steps, there was no way that the third could have been achieved. So this is just a very brief, very brief summary of what we saw last week. And I really want to go back. And last week we did the question of, why organize? And I think ultimately we walked away also knowing that we can't do this alone. And if this person would have continued the cry alone, he wouldn't have, or she wouldn't have gone anywhere without the 2 steps and without building a base of people. So in regards to this, we teach, and maybe I'll just do the credential also, that's probably a good idea. The San Diego Organizing Project organizes in about 32 congregations in the county. We're multi-faith, multicultural, multiracial organization, and we organize in North County, in the city, and now in South Bay also. I'm the South Bay organizer, which is why I'm here. But we also belong to a national network of federations, just like San Diego Organizing Project. There's about 60 in the country, and they're all also faith-based. So through the umbrella of PICO, and PICO stands for People Improving Communities Through Organizing, which was founded over 40 years ago. We use a model of organizing, and it's really a set of principles that lead and guide our work, and it's also a process that was formed on the basis of, I don't know if many of you are familiar, but with Saul Alinsky's principles of organizing. So it all goes back to the 1960s and the decline of mediating institutions like the NAACP, the Elks. There was a decline. Saul Alinsky started initially organizing in neighborhoods. So he would walk around, knock on doors, and so did SDOP. And then realized, people leave neighborhoods. And then people only work together, and in those times we're only working together with people who look like each other, who talk like each other. So there was really, it was just very monolingual, and it was just a group of all white people, all brown people, so it was like that. And then Saul Alinsky realized if there's one place where people are always together, and they don't really leave, it's in congregations. So the foundation of faith-based organizing was when there was a decline in that, and then regular people and regular values were no longer represented in big institutions or big political powers because there was nobody fighting for them. So I say this because the PICO, one of the biggest and the key PICO principles is power is in the relationship. And power is a really strong word, and we'll break that down later. But why don't we take a minute or two and just think about this principle. Power is in the relationship. What do you think this means? Just initially or naturally, what does this mean to you?
It has to be a group of people, not one person, because
Mhm.
one person can do that. So it's the relationship between the thing and the power.
Great. What about over here?
Well, the power is in the bond of people.
Mhm. So something keeps those people together.
Together.
Okay.
Power is in how they relate to each other and react to each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
Together you can do a whole lot more than by yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. And part of this also is, and you're really speaking about self-interest, and we're also going to break that down later. But when you meet, and there's another principle that says meet people where they are, not where you want them to be, and that really is the foundation of relationships as well. So you're all right. This really, and ultimately, the relationship building creates power. And we believe that when people start relating to each other in their congregations, they build internal power, and then there's a need to take that out and build relationships amongst Lemon Grove, Chula Vista, downtown, and then build Episcopal power. And ultimately, like the bigger picture of this is that there are over 60 federations and people like me, organizers like me around the country doing the exact same thing, teaching people the exact same organizing model, so that there is a dominant narrative about people's values and the need for there to be values at the center of political and economic powers. And last time we also talked, I did another one of my fabulous drawings. And we talked about values, money, and politics. And then I asked you all, how is this working? Are values always present? And we all agreed, no, they're not. So when it's just here, it's a tug of war between both of them. And we find that we see the real world the way it is, because most of the time, or at least in the congregations that we're talking about right now, the values are not present. And that leads to people feeling isolated, depressed, completely disfranchised, and that ultimately leads to powerlessness. And when people feel powerless, they don't think they can do anything. They go back to even before number one, they just feel alone. So let's go back to the real world and what I mentioned before. Let's go back to, and let's state here, what do you see right now as the ills in the world? What's happening? What are people hurting from in the world?
Police brutality.
Fear.
Fear in general.
Low wages.
Poverty.
Equity.
Sexism, racism, all the isms.
Yeah. And why do you think this is happening?
Because we don't share the same values.
Who doesn't share the same values?
A lot of different people.
disparities in economics,
Mm-hmm.
social mores,
So if we put a value on these two entities, what do you think the values within politics are? What's the one value for them?
Power.
Power. There's power's coming up again. And what do you think is the values in money or in economics? More money, more power. But when we talk about values, and here I'm talking about St. John's and I'm talking about St. Philip's, what do these mean to us? What are those values to you?
Principles.
Tell me one of your principles that you believe in.
Love. Sharing.
Justice.
Compassion.
Justice, compassion, fairness. Do we see love, compassion, fairness, equity, equality in these? So ultimately, we believe that the real world is the way it is, and the ultimate consequence of all this is that people who are poor are getting poorer. People who are sick are getting sicker. And in order for us to really understand how people are hurting, is really to put this into context and to paint a picture. So I'm going to just go through like an illustration again, and we're going to just describe a family in the west side of Chula Vista. Let's say that they're is there a Perez in here? So the Perez family. 3 kids, 2 parents. 2 of the kids are in elementary school, one of them is a toddler. What do you think are the pressures on the Perez family?
Housing.
Housing.
What else?
Financial, not enough money to.
Minimum wage jobs, not necessarily.
Jobs?
Depends on their
Healthcare.
educational.
So let's say in a typical, not typical, but in most Chula Vista families, and let's just focus on the west side, one of the most low-income communities, number 2 largest undocumented population in the county. So let's just pretend that this is the Perez family. So we said, what was the other one?
Healthcare.
Health.
Yeah, but you've got the Affordable Care Act now, so you can get health coverage through Covered California.
Language.
Okay, so we'll go back to that.
Unless they're undocumented. Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
let's say they're undocumented.
Yeah. Transportation, if you can afford it though.
And if someone
There's subsidies.
has 3 kids and one of them is a toddler, they probably need childcare. So this can go on and on, we know.
And hopefully they're getting their vaccinations.
Hopefully. So now let's talk about the consequences. What are the consequences of not having affordable housing or not having safe housing or, access to a healthy environment? What are the consequences of these pressures?
Life is very
Domestic
stressful.
violence.
Stress, yes. So stress,
And there's food insecurity.
domestic violence,
Gang bound.
yes. Gangs, probably low quality schools or like poor schools.
I don't know, that's Sweetwater, right? Isn't that Sweetwater?
Not the elementary level, it's not.
What's the elementary district? Is it Idaho?
Depends on where you are
Mm-hmm.
in South Bay. There are, 5 elementary school districts in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Elementary schools. in
Sweetwater
South Bay are pretty
Sweetwater
good.
is a high school district, it's the
But the
largest.
elementary schools are pretty good in South Bay, if I remember correctly.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. So what else do we see as consequences of this? So what's the consequence of not knowing the language?
Or communication.
Less opportunities.
Vulnerability.
Less access
That's
to
like the
resources?
low-wage
Yeah.
women.
Might be a vulnerability, though. People can take
Mhm.
jobs. so.
That's true.
The children are in elementary school, so they're going to have a language program.
Yeah, they're probably placed in EL programs.
Parents probably can't participate.
Exactly.
In school
Children
because
probably
they're probably both working.
Exactly.
So there's family disconnect at home.
Exactly. So yeah, then there's also, let's say, if they can't afford housing or it's not affordable, they probably have to work 2 or 3 jobs. How many of us don't know families like that? Which probably means that they're not home very
They
much.
may live in another family just to do things.
Exactly. Aside from this, there's also been studies that show that money then leads to domestic violence, so that can also lead to drug and alcohol abuse, which then can mean parents are absent from the home, there's no time to be with the children, stress, nutrition, even with Affordable Care Act, people can still be very, very unhealthy. I know that for our organization has worked on a hotspots project that found that National City and Southeast San Diego have the highest rate of high blood pressure, heart-related diseases. So there's certain parts that are linked with poverty that are also keep people sick. So the purpose of this is really to demonstrate that the values and the needs of the Bettis family are not represented in what we call the political or economic systems. That we've spent so many years, or they've spent, and the dominant narrative has spent so many years constructing these powerful agencies that do not take into account or break down all of this for us.
They employ a lot of people for
They do, not very much money.
No. These agencies, they're.
Well, the social safety net is administered by the county, and the county is Republican, and they do not like to give out the money. So that's number one. So it makes it very hard to access services. But what the Bettis family has going for them is that South Bay, with its increasingly large Latino population, if people ever get out and vote regularly on a regular basis, they will be able to vote in candidates who can make a difference. I recommend Democrats.
And we have some good services in the South.
We do, and I think that that's a clear reflection too of when there is a bigger population that people probably relate to each other. But I was just in National City today actually, and I did some research on the demographics, and over 80% in National City are people of color. Yet the people representing the city council or the people really making decisions are not. And that's really what we see in other cities, and I know Chula Vista is a much stronger, healthier city, but it's quite common even in San Diego, the city, to see, for example, minimum wage pushed down. LA just passed a $15 minimum wage increase, and we're still fighting for the $13 that they don't want to give us.
And as they go to like 2020, right?
Exactly.
It's a long time.
Exactly. So this is really the big picture of what we're up against. And when I mean building power, I mean power as as a person, but then also a collective power. When people come together and realize people's stories, and when we talk about one-to-ones and building relationships, it's about understanding these issues. When I sit down and talk to Norma or Anita, and I explain to them, this is what I'm going through. I don't go to the schools, I don't go to my kids' meetings, because I get out of work at 10 p.m. and I have to pick up my kid. So really understanding where people are coming from is a very strong foundation for us to understand what we're up against. So we ultimately, and I will repeat this over and over again, that building relationships is where people build power, especially in congregations. And there's also the notion that there's really 2 big evils, and one of them is greed, and he's not here today. What was that man's name?
Simon?
Simon was talking about greed and the fact that, there's a lot less focus on valuing human people, just humans or people, and really valuing now just like the money and how much people are worth financially instead of that. But the other evil that exists now is that people aren't talking to each other. In the 1960s, when we had the civil rights movements, who did we know from the 1960s? We have Martin Luther King, we have Cesar Chavez, and then Dolores Huerta next to him too. But what happened when those two people were gone?
Leadership, lost leadership.
Yeah. And the organizers who brought faith organizing to California, to San Diego, realized one person cannot do this by themselves. Because if that one person is murdered, then it all falls apart. And if we think about a congregation like St. John's, if we have 1,000 people coming to church every Sunday, city council will be impacted. But if we have even 500 people in city council is going to pay attention. So amongst these two, and I know this is a very, very depressing conversation, this ultimately is the notion that these two evils create a system where people are ultimately left out. People's normal life values are not part of this conversation because you don't talk about it, you keep it to yourself and you don't share, and then you don't love or understand each other. And on this side, they don't see you, you're invisible. So from here, I want to take us back to power, and I'm just going to circle this again. For folks in the room, at least for me, power is my own definition, but what does power mean to you? What does it mean? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Just the notion of power.
what I want.
Not necessarily,
But
but
do you, Sandy, do you think it's good? Do you have power?
I have some power. I would say I have more influence than I have power.
Okay.
To me, it's mainly negative.
Okay. And why do you say that? What have been your experiences with power?
Mainly because of what I see on the television. And the people with power there do not impress me.
An abuse of
It, to
power.
me, it has a negative connotation.
That's the negative, the abuse of power is the
Yes,
negative.
I think that's what I see mainly is the abuse of power. So
Okay.
it has a negative connotation for me.
Okay.
I would say it's a means, the means to do something. It depends on what you are empowered to do or what your intentions are. It could be good or bad.
Okay. Okay, so let's move from there. So in PICO and in our organization, we see power as neutral. And we use the PICO definition of power as the capacity to act. And the reason why we probably, and even my instinct is to say power is bad also, as a Latina and as a young person grew up in the South Bay, because the only evidence and examples of power that we see are on the television, and those are typically not, they don't look like me. The people and the decisions being made by people in power don't reflect my values. Therefore, I see them as bad, and I see them as not me. And ultimately, our work is aiming to teach churches that we need to figure out how to impact the world and the communities around us. And a way to do that is really to understand and to try to obtain the capacity to act. And in organizing, we believe that you can do that in two ways. You either have money or people. And I will do this in every single training I do because I want to see if I find a millionaire. But is anybody here a millionaire or billionaire? Step forward.
What will we tell you?
We're in a congregation, so I hope so. So no
If I tell
takers?
you,
Nobody here.
then Colin will have to hit me up for a huge pledge at church.
And SCOP too.
Yeah, I think you and I should have a one-to-one. I want to build power with you. So no millionaires in the room? Going once, going twice, no. Okay, so every single time I say this, it doesn't work, but we're in the business of people, obviously. In 32 congregations that we work with in San Diego, we have over 70,000 families we work with. And we believe that with building a community of people of faith, we are able to represent our values in public life. And in order to build power, we have to build organization. And what I mean by that is what I was saying before, is that in order to build organization, you have to do two things. And one of them is to win. You only believe in something when you see results. How many of us have been on a diet and you do it for like 2 weeks, you don't see result, and then you stop, and then you do it again a year later after New Year's? How many of us have done that? Yeah, a lot of people. Or when you want to invest in something and you don't see results, then you just let it go. But we want to win something. And that's the way that you build organization, because then you build trust and really just a reputation of being someone that has power. But second, we also develop leaders. And a lot of leaders. So by us building organization, by building San Diego Organizing Project, we want to prove that we can win something. And the way that we do that also is by developing leaders. So there's an actual national leadership training that folks, once they go through like the first initial exploratories of organizing, they're invited to do that once a year. There's different opportunities. I think there's 2 a year where people are trained in spaces, not just amongst each other in the same denomination, but then you go and you meet people from the entire country and you're trained together under the same concept. So developing leaders is our job. And my job is to teach this model and the process and the principles to you, and then I can go to Lemon Grove and teach it there, and I can teach it in San Isidro, so then South Bay has the same message and the same principles. So from building, and we've talked about, I mentioned before about taking this outside of the church, and really that's what PICO does. And just to add on to what we learned last time, we do local issues. So here it can be someone, there's a sidewalk that's hasn't been replaced in years, people are hurting, people are getting hurt, whatever it is, then you do something as small as a win like that, but it's still a win. People are still excited. And then there's state issues, and then there's national issues. And there's a level then of creating an organization and building organizations so that people feel like they're part of something. People feel like they can win something and they win it together. And so there, like I said, there's a model that we use. I'm going to share that knowledge also. The PICO model. And this is really the organizing model that we talked about that was developed through the principles of Saul Alinsky. And that is listen, leads to learn, to act, and then reflect. And in the center is faith. So when we talk about listening, we're referring to those one-to-ones. And when we talk about those one-to-ones, it's really, and I know Simon last time asked, how do I get people to care about this? How do you get people excited? Because, we do these types of meetings and 5 people show up, or we go to city council, no one wants to come with us. How do you get people from the comfort of their very large chair to go outside? How do we do that? And part of the one-to-ones, and really the ultimate goal of a one-to-one, is to dig into people's self-interest and their own story. What does self-interest, the 2 words itself, what does that trigger in you? What have you heard in your life, in your formation, that means?
It sounds as though it's selfish.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is that it's actually a point of contact.
But you've been told it's selfish.
Correct.
Okay. Anybody else? Put selfish here. In other, especially Christian denominations, self-interest if you're on this side, a very, very bright side, it's also the work of a saint, someone being completely selfless. So you're either on either side. So self-interest is in the middle, and we describe this as a healthy sense of self. And we believe, and we know that people are taught this. We know that if you're in people's lives, people are told if you work out of your self-interest, you're selfish. And then there's people that are saying you have to be selfless. Who cares what you need or what you want? You have to do what's best for everybody. This is also ridiculous. This is not realistic. Because if you do this, then you work for other people, and ultimately the only way that you can really meet people where they're at is digging into their self-interest. And the way that we really dig into self-interest is by hearing people's stories. Is hearing people where their suffering is or where their love is, and sharing your own, and finding a healthy sense of self in order to relate each other and then to win something together. Self-interest in Latin is interesse, and that really means self among others. So that means that we are ourselves amongst each other. So it means really working and creating a change or creating social justice and seeing that while always staying true to what you believe in. And so going back to the model, we believe that the only way to really, and back to that question, I kept thinking about it, how do you convince people that this is what they need to do? The first time you meet with someone and you have a one-to-one and you do that encounter, you just talk about what people care about, you listen. In a one-to-one, and there's maybe more training on what a one-to-one is, but you do 80% listening. And if it's true that Carlos is a good listener, then he probably has this down. But it's hard to just sit and listen, right? How many times do we just want to talk? He's laughing, and I'm not even going to ask why. And then Gary looked over.
Especially if you're self-centered.
Yeah, exactly. So it's hard as a human being to want to just listen. But that's where you really dig into people's self-interest. And just allow, this is the most radical thing that faith organizing does. It's not protesting, it's not anything direct action. This is the most insanely radical thing that PICO and San Diego Organizing Project does. Is meeting people and encountering, and as a Catholic I've been learning about the culture of encounter that the Pope is talking about. And it's actually meeting people and talking to them and looking at them, remembering their face and what their heart is saying. That doesn't happen anymore. And I'm going to talk about the Pope because I'm a Catholic, and please forgive me if I offend anybody, but the Pope is teaching me a lot as a young Catholic that I never paid attention to. But he even talked about the culture of waste. A culture so obsessed with technology and just wasting time and money and objects and not investing in people. There's a faith reflection where he said that he witnessed someone giving a charity to or money to a homeless person. And, people walk by and just throw the money, keep walking by, people just walk by and throw and toss money. And he asked them, when was the last time that you gave someone $1, $2 in their hand and looked at their face? That moment of knowing what someone looks like and what you see when you hand that money is worth so much more than those $2. And that's something that we pride ourselves in, and that we know we've seen people's faith transformed when you're challenged to do this. And it's not easy, and it's not fast, and it doesn't happen overnight, because we've been taught or we've been accustomed to being silenced and caring just about our own selfish self-interest and not about the common self-interest, that we don't have these encounters anymore. The model then moves into learning, and we refer to this as research. And It's not about researching a paper or a topic, going online. We refer to research as public meetings with public officials where we go and we dig deeper into the root cause of a problem. And an example of that could be, there's a very large amount of homeless people around St. John's School. We want to go to City Council. Who's in charge of the homelessness unit, or who's in charge? We then start figuring out and navigating public places to understand the problem and understand that maybe there are no homeless shelters in Chula Vista. Maybe there are not mental health services in the South Bay, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just an example to explain that research is also taking people into public spaces and allowing them to declare that they are a person of faith stepping into a public space. It's a very big, courageous act to come out from your church with a group of people who've gone through this series of teachings with you and declare, this is wrong because my values say that it's wrong. And I want to know what we can do to change it. So that's the second step to it. The third step is action, really. And an action is a public event, a public action, where you invite a public official or someone with some type of decision-making authority into the place where you belong. So it would be St. John's or St. Philip's. And you ask them and you make a demand, or we call it a PIN, to change that problem or to improve that problem. So it's really bringing people, and you don't go to City Council. Well, you can go to City Council, but the powerful thing about this is that you can bring a mayor, the DA, the chief of police into a public space, into your own public space, and bring what you learned along in the whole time with your values and pin them on something. Lastly, and a big part of it, and this is something that we believe is very, very powerful, is reflecting on how did we do? What could we have done better? And then the beautiful thing about this is that it never ends. You don't do it once and it stops. You do it over and over and over again until maybe, in 300-400 years, Chula Vista changes, or everybody has food and everybody has a shelter and everybody has access to health care. Then we'll disappear, and that's fine. If my job disappears, then I'll be happy because that means that people are happy and loved and respected. But until then, congregations use this model over and over again in their congregations, and while this is happening, they're developing leaders in this space. So people can come in different parts, but the good thing about this is that congregations have the freedom to do this over and over again. So do we have any questions up until now? No? Okay. So ultimately, I think the reflection on this is really, and our director, Kevin, last time I said it, he's a hoot, and I think he'll be here next week. He says if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And he today talked to me about our silence is golden for people who are in power. If we're not organizing in our own self-interest, someone else is. Someone else is taking the silence and the lack of activity or activeness to make sure that their self-interest is met. So today's main objective was to illustrate the idea of what we're up against. And it's not always political entities. Sometimes it's really amongst our own congregation and taking the most courageous step into relating and encountering people. And then the rest really just falls into place. And I say that with all sincerity. So in the next session, we'll go more into what a one-to-one is. And I know Kevin will be here, and we'll be able to really explain and show what a one-to-one looks like, what the basic tools for a one-to-one are, and then we'll also bring the tools and just an example of what when churches accept or take on the challenge of becoming part of faith organizing, they create what is called a local organizing committee, which we know as LOCs. They meet monthly. In the beginning, they might meet more. But we'll bring those tools for you to show you what are other congregations in the county currently doing and how do they maintain this type of work. So that's what I have for today. Again, I'll open the space if anybody has questions or if you want to elaborate on anything or any ideas showing up, concerns.
My concern still is about separation of church and state and the whole issue of us as the church taking a political stance. I understand about the value piece. I'm clear about that, but it's still a concern of mine.
Yeah, and I think that aside from, like I said, stepping into encountering people, and I think that's something that initially is a conversation that we have with pastors and with people who are the clergy in each congregation in making sure that we create the trust and explain the model and the process in order for the clergy to or for them to accept or for them to know that there is a notion of separation of church and state, and there is merit to it being separated, like I said last time. But there is also what we believe that without our values or without communities of faith at the table, the decisions that are going to happen around our world and in our communities are not going to have our values anywhere near those decisions. And I think that's definitely something that you can dig deeper in when you start having those conversations. That might be the main concern for people in your church, and then that might be the first issue that you address. But yeah, I don't know, Colin, if you have a better insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, often there's just not, people don't know that legally nonprofits can do plenty of advocacy work. It's just the problem is when you start to get to the partisan candidate. St. Paul's Cathedral was really involved in Prop 8. No problem at all. But I think getting back to that silence is golden thing, kind of ask who benefits when churches stay out of politics because of the whole church and state thing. First of all, there's plenty of churches that don't stay out of politics, and so they're still getting their word in, whether it's legal or not. But then, if you get back to that Chula Vista family, I guess you could call that politics, but for them it's their life, and it's not, for those people, yeah, it's getting home at 10 p.m. thing, and the stress that comes with that. So it's not, I don't know, for me, politics is this thing that I can do or not do, if I read the paper and I can click a little button and sign a petition on an email or something, so it can be an interesting debate and that sort of thing. For a lot of people, politics just means my life kind of sucks, and I wish I could do something about it. And I think God does call us to do what we can in legal ways. So don't worry, like the cathedral will always be worried about the legal stuff, so we'll never do anything that's illegal, which is great. But God cares that people just live healthy, thriving lives. And so if we can do something to help with that, I think it's something we're invited into. And in the meantime, the process is transformative. That whole leadership development thing is life-changing and liberating, frankly, or it has been for me.
Another principle that I always fall back on is there's no permanent allies or no permanent enemies, only permanent issues. And that's something that, especially as a young person graduating from college and coming home and trying to change the world, I realized I can't be angry at a person or a candidate or a party because I'm never going to win like that. Realistically, this work, the separation of church and state and faith organizing teaches, at least has taught me, that the only way to win something is to focus on the issues and the pressures that are really hurting families and hurting people, and that aren't reflective of what God's kingdom was meant to be. And so I think that's something that's also just learned, once it's seen, once it's really lived and people are really understand the transformative process of it, really understand that you can be in a room with 2 Republicans and agree on an issue because they understand that that issue is about people's lives and about the value of human dignity. And it happens, and we've seen it happen. And that's one of the biggest things that I've had to learn.
I think it's hard because we're just, as a society, losing the ability to talk about politics without it being partisan or we're just losing that language. So it's hard to even imagine what that would look like. But I think politics is something that we engage in every day, whether we do it or not, partly because of our non-action. But here maybe is another way to think about it. If this is sort of a social process for how we get involved, what might the religious sort of parallel be? I think one way to think about this, and Gary kind of got me thinking about it, is one, it's just conversion, right? Religious conversion. 2, so after you convert, and that's an individual experience, you go to church, there's a public sort of processing, formation, support process, right? So that's kind of the communal formation. But what happens if that works well? What's 3? It's kind of like that release of social imagination, but what would that be in a religious sense? Proclamation of the good news in the world, right? That fruit of the formation out in the world. So is that political? It's public. I tend to think that when things are public, they're definitely political. But of course, we would never argue with proclaiming the good news is something we shouldn't be doing, right? I mean, that's straight out of the Bible.
Well,
What does that look like, right? So we always think of proclaiming good news as those annoying people on the corners, right?
right. And not feeding them until they hear.
Yeah. But isn't it also people power and helping transform people's lives? That's proclaiming good news too.
But we don't do that.
No,
I mean, I have to say, I mean, when we get ready to do showers of blessings, we don't insist that people listen to a sermon first.
No,
We offer the
but
good
that's
news.
the connotation that evangelism is.
Right.
Right, but that's, we talk about evangelism at the cathedral all the time, and that's not who we are.
But it's true that we have a lot of people have a lot of
But you're
baggage
right,
that's
I cannot like it
legitimate.
either.
But that's what's great about the Episcopal Church is we're never gonna err on that side, for better or worse.
I do really, and maybe somebody in this room, it's very interesting to me that and maybe it was just the cathedral around Prop 8, no one saw that as something we wouldn't do. But I don't know how many of your churches participated in Prop 47, which by the way, was endorsed by the California Council of Bishops. And yet, yeah, the Episcopal bishops, yes, they all came out and endorsed it in favor of it. So we're allowed to do that. Prop 47, everybody remember that? And yet, you heard nothing about that through the Episcopal Diocese in San Diego. And when that came up within the cathedral, everyone acted like, and I actually know where that came from, that's something we can't do. That is absolutely untrue. That is untrue. That has nothing to do with the separation of church and state. We cannot endorse Todd Gloria, but we can talk about Todd's policy.
But I think the difference for the cathedral, at least, and why we did so much for Prop 8, that didn't even get started the conversation on Prop 47, is because Prop 8 were our people. Those are the people that were sitting next to us in the pews. And so it was natural. It was just who we were. It was that self-interest thing. We fight for who we love, because we know them. And for Prop 47, I think, is a mostly privileged in different ways, mostly Anglo congregation. A lot of us aren't experiencing what it would mean to have your felonies reduced to misdemeanors because you're in prison for drug-related charges.
So St. Philip's has a mainly Latino congregation. Where were you all? Did you all do anything around Prop 47?
Well, basically, we have a lot of our congregation are undocumented. So they're not allowed to vote, so they're not very into politics in that way. Of course, that a lot of people engage with people from their neighborhoods that have problems. and we're in favor of that. But it wasn't a formal discussion or anything that we talked about.
Let me give an example now that we're talking about Prop 47. So last year during the election season, San Diego Organizing Project ran a campaign to support Prop 47. And we did have the Catholic bishops support, but it's not a dominant narrative or issue amongst the Latino community, especially Catholics, to talk about the criminal justice system. Really, it's really just not talked about, or it's shameful, or there's just a lot of baggage to it. But when we talked about Prop 47 and we brought it to Catholic churches, we started thinking, and there's this amazing woman that I hope you all meet. Her name's Gloria Morales, a leader from Christ the King. She started thinking, what happens when someone's undocumented, who has a felony because they shoplifted 5-6 times because they couldn't afford the formula and the diapers, and now that DAPA was introduced and DACA extension, can they apply? No, because they have a felony. So then we started making the connection. Well, then Prop 47 matters to Latino leaders or Latino residents of the county, because if they have a felony and then they want to then apply for something that would give them temporary relief, they have to get that felony reduced at least to a misdemeanor. Because right now, PEPCOM, which is the new secure communities that's deporting people, are coming after the top priorities, which are people with felonies. So issues, like Colin said, then people start jumping on into issues because they feel it and they understand. My cousin, my brother, they can relate to this, and I'm going to go walk and knock on doors because my cousin and my uncle will benefit from this.
I think also, back to the self-interest thing and seeing it as selfish. Why would a basically Anglo church like the Cathedral be interested in Prop 47? Because we are affected. We are affected when felonies occur. We are affected when people go to jail for something that should be a misdemeanor and then become a hardened criminal and then are returned into the world with no training and no rehabilitation. So it's just like, what does the Affordable Care Act have to do with me? Well, if you don't have health care and you can't get your children vaccinated and your child comes down with whooping cough, and if there are enough people, then I'm going to be affected by that too. And in fact, my grandchildren got whooping cough even though they had been vaccinated, and my daughter is a pediatrician. So I'm saying we are affected. It is in our self-interest, benevolent or not, to care. And if we're Christian, and that's what Colin's talking about, isn't that our job to care and proclaim the good news and say, Christ cared, Christ had compassion, we care. I mean, that is our job. And there is nothing legal that prevents us from doing that.
And I guess I'm thinking just back to the notion of meeting people where they are and not where you want them to be is also challenging. We all want to love. We all know that for the most part, Christians and people of faith want to love and give people the value of human dignity. But it's really just meeting them in their self-interest, where their pain or their love is at, and then moving from there. And then people start loving and coming together and really understanding the pain together because they share that common story. And it might just take for you to start having one-to-ones and talking to folks, and maybe a lot of folks think like you, but they don't know that you exist, or they don't know that you're feeling this way, and that's why nobody talks about it. Who knows? I mean, that might be the situation. But I don't know, Colin, if there's anything else you want to add? Or any other thoughts going around?
What is that phrase they use in the Episcopalian Church? Preach the gospel and if necessary use words. I like that. It's your actions. Right? It's your actions. You don't have to say, oh, you have to believe this dogma and this. No. You show your love by your actions. That you make you sing.
I actually think we're about to challenge ourselves inadvertently because the cathedral is about to do a kind of mini capital campaign to do this really cool thing with colored lights outside our building, so at night, like when planes come in and stuff, there's gonna be like really cool, like light designs on the outside of our church, which is awesome. But what would that look like through our actions to do the same thing? That people would be like, wow, that place is beautiful in the same way as some lights that we put up through what we're known about doing in the world, you know? So I think it's gonna kind of raise a standard for us, because it's easy to put lights up at the end of the day, right? But it is hard to do this good work in the world, but that's what we're supposed to do, right? So, looking forward to that.
And a tiny example of what the cathedral has done, just started this year, actually. We've been involved with Pride and giving water during the Pride Parade for many years. But this year, because of our new dean, we had water for the St. Patrick's Day Parade. And we were just there to hand out water. It was a very hot day, so one man came across the street, and he said, "I've been watching you all morning, just give water." And he said, what a witness that is to the community. I mean, again, it's just a little example, but a hot day and we had water available. You know, so it's just, we don't even necessarily have to overthink what we can do. It's just, it's getting an idea and making it happen. Elaine was there. She was taking that out on the street with heavy trays of water.
Well, it just was a very, very hot day. It was. Everybody was working. I forgot how many thousand cups of water. And we had just done a stewardship campaign, of the title of which was Living Water. So, yeah. And, you know, and then you roll into Easter, where we all start with the Easter fire, the Easter vigil, and the dry baptismal faith, and then the water gets poured. We're all about imagery. But I think Colin is right. I mean, one of the dangers, I think, I can't speak for other churches, but one of the dangers of going to the cathedral is that it is enticing to stay within the campus because it's beautiful, and we like each other, and we have a lot of those relationships that you talk about, and so the challenge is to take those relationships and the beautiful things that we all experience and make them, you know, available in a way that meets the needs, not our need, but the needs of people on the outside. And it is a challenge, and it's fearful. Sort of.
It's fun. So the third session is going to be about...
It's going to be really digging into what the one looks like and experiencing it in the group. We'll have a chance to do that, and then we'll also illustrate what a local organizing committee looks like, just so there's a real understanding of when we talk about, you know, the work and doing this and taking on the notion of organizing, what that really looks like in congregations, and what the ask is, or what, you know, the responsibility of being a local organizing ministry really is. So we'll bring all of like the basic tools of like, kind of like a starter kit of what that would look like if you were to take it to your congregation.
Kevin?
I will help Kevin.
So he's the executive director. He's really cool.
Yes.
You're going to come too?
Yes, I'll come with him.
Nice. So this will be an awesome last session. Hope you enjoy it. Shall we pray? Sure. Okay. Stand up and hold hands. Anyone else want to offer the prayer tonight? Or? Okay. Okay, let us pray. Loving and merciful and powerful God, thank you for bringing us here this night. And continue to work within us to give us the courage and vision and willingness to try this new thing together for your greater glory, and so that all people may thrive. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Have a good night.